Tonight, our first case that we're going to look into is an infamous one from the UK, Peter Sutcliffe, otherwise known as the Yorkshire Ripper. And this was a gruesome, gruesome case. And John, you've got some interesting insights into this, and we're going to look then at the moors, and you're going to tie it together with a theory of your own. So let's get started and tell us a little bit about Peter Sutcliffe.
Well, I mean, Peter Sutcliffe, he well known for a serial killer of prostitutes in the Leeds area of northern England. And I mean, he was active between 1975 to 1980, and he actually got convicted of 20 concurrent life sentences with 13 confirmed murders. And what was striking about this, it all occurred in the West Riding area of Yorkshire. Now, the Byford report, which was conducted into the failings on the Yorkshire Ripper thing, and this was conducted in the 80s. The findings weren't released until 2006. So why the need to cover it up? And we got to look at again Jimmy Savile's connection with Peter Sutcliffe.
Yeah.
And the fact that one of the victims was found in was it Alderhay, where he lives, where Savile had an apartment.
Okay.
And one of the victims was sort of basically laid outside of the block of flats where Savile had an apartment.
Wow.
And again, they maintained a close relationship with him too. He was always visiting him in Broadmoor and was given the keys and the fellowship to the elders of Broadmoor or something like that. He was entrusted with access all areas, which is very bizarre. I mean, who is this guy? Who is Savile?
Yeah.
And for what reason would you align yourself?
Do you feel like the body being left outside that block of flats, was that almost done in a tribute sort of way, do you feel?
No. Yeah, it's bizarre, isn't it?
It's very bizarre.
Savile was brought in, and if my memory serves me well, I think they took his bite mark, his denture imprint, his teeth imprint, because bite marks were found on the victim, and Savile was put up for it. And there was also a rumour that Savile might have been the hoaxer who did the voice that led the inquiry away from where it should have been.
I'm Jack. I see you are still having no luck catching me. I have the greatest respect for you, George. But Lord, you are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started. I reckon your boys are letting you down, George. They can't be much good, can they? The only time they came near catching me was a few months back in Chapeltown when I was disturbed. I warned you in March that I'd strike again. Sorry it wasn't Bradford. I'm not quite sure when I'll strike again. But it will be definitely sometime this year. I'm not sure where. Maybe Manchester. I like it there. There's plenty of them knocking about. They never learn, do they, George? I bet you've warned them, but they never listen. Well, it's been nice chatting to you, George. Yours, Jack the Ripper.
Because there was a tape was sent to the incident room, and it was claiming to be someone from the northeast, from sort of like Ironside that way.
That's right.
And it sort of led them away. And the rumours were that was actually Savile's voice. So who knows, bizarre, but I know that that he was looked at on a couple of occasions, and there were many failings within the incident room within West Yorkshire Police, and this is something that we spoke about in regards to the Jill Dando and also the Rachel Nickel murders, that you get this bizarre attitude from these senior investigating overseeing officers that doesn't make any sense. Yet they're allowed to carry on with some bizarre course of conduct, which doesn't take the investigation in the direction it should be going.
Yeah,
It should be an intelligence-led investigation. Sometimes where it goes is away from the information coming in.
You said something in the Madeleine McCann episode, right towards the end. You said, this is the biggest cover-up of the biggest gang, which is the file gang, and it always seems to be in cases that tail back to some sort of horrific abuse or child abuse. In these cases where there's cover-up and conspiracy, it's ongoing. You've just told us that Jimmy Savile is connected with the Yorkshire Ripper. I just want to say to the viewers, at no point have we planned a series of videos where we're subtly inserting Jimmy Savile. This is mind-blowing to me. I don't know if it's mind-blowing to the viewers, but
there was one victim, and it was a young girl, and she wasn't a prostitute, and she was bludgeoned to death with a hammer, with a ball-peen hammer. And this is where Sutcliffe came to be getting a message from God. And he says in his interview that he looked up and he said, "Why, master?" or something like that. He refers to him addressing a master, and they thought he was talking about his delusion with God or something like that. But I mean, what if that it was actually Savile that was with him, and he referred to Savile as a master, which is a term which is used in secret societies quite a lot, worshipful master and things like that.
Of course, yeah.
Within the hierarchy, and of course it was out of his MO. It was out of context with the murders we've been doing prior to that. So this one was a bit of an anomaly, and there was that bizarre comment that Savile made in the interview that he does with Louis Theroux, and he says that women are brain damaged. Well, this is what happened to this young girl. She was bludgeoned to death, and her brain was smashed in.
I think I remember the quote. I think he says, any longer than 2 hours and you end up with brain damage. That is quite chilling, because we're talking about a man who, once again, in the Jill Dando episode, we showed clips of the Have I Got News For You episode where he refers to himself as a wrestler on national television who's feared by every private schoolgirl in the country. Just rationally try and comprehend that sentence coming out of someone's mouth and then tying it back to Savile. This is a man, and again, when you said about the Ripper call and the false call, it just all falls into place with his MO and the things that he does and putting it in people's faces. And it's once again mind-blowing, because this wasn't something that I knew was even tied in with this case. And just to sort of circle back, just for a minute, just finish off the sort of summary for us, John, of the Ripper, and just bring it back round. I'm just wanting to make sure that our viewers understand the magnitude of this guy's murders and just how dark a case it is.
Well, yeah. So Peter Sutcliffe, he was a lorry driver, and from the mid 70s through to the early 80s, that part of the Yorkshire, it did move over into Lancashire, but that sort of region, the northwest and the north cluster of the UK, there was a lot of panic. A lot of women were standing on the streets because women were getting murdered. Prostitutes were being targeted, mainly in the Leeds area, and they were just being battered to death. And they put it down to one person, and this is where the Yorkshire Ripper got the terminology. And then he was arrested. I forget what happened. It was some by the way that he got arrested for. Anyway, they linked it to him. And again, when you look at his life, he was a loner. He was a very introverted individual. His dad was an alcoholic and a violent man, and he started using prostitutes and then he ended up with this hatred for prostitutes. And I think one of them mocked him or something, mocked his penis or something like that, and he ended up attacking her, and I think he went back and killed her or something like that. I'd have to recheck on it, but from then
Sure.
on he got this bloodlust and started taking out all his inadequacies and his dysfunctionality and that on prostitutes.
And it wasn't just
a long
murders.
run of it.
It wasn't just murders, was it, John? There was a series of attacks as well as murders. So that were linked to the Ripper as well.
I mean, what they're saying, that there was, they reckon that there was more. There was 23 confirmed murders. There were 7 like GBHs, and they reckon it was as much as 22 murders. But that it could have been many more. And this bizarre world of street prostitution, can be a very dark place. I mean, I worked for quite a few years on Scotland Yard's Vice Unit, and my job was to go out with a partner, but it'd always team us up, a man and a girl. We would go out and arrest and charge the street prostitutes.
You've worked Vice,
and
you've worked Vice, and you've worked the child abuse section. You've had I mean, these are serious sections of the police, John. Like, just to sort of so the viewers grasp your just where this wealth of knowledge comes from, because it's not like you were sat at a desk or you were out beating a beat cop. You were part of some very specialist task force and units. I mean, I'm not blowing. I'm not trying to kiss anyone's ass here. I'm just making sure the viewers understand why John's opinion on these cases has so much weight behind it, and it's fascinating. And Sutcliffe and his reign. I mean, his absolute reign of terror. I mean, it was genuine fear across the country. It was legitimate. People were completely mortified and shocked, staying in because of fear. Do you feel that with murderers, right, and killers, their murders and those acts are often seen by them as their work or their legacy, if you will, their what it is they've done? And for me, I feel like there must be this standard where when they start killing and they start out on this rampage, that there's killings they're proud of and there's killings they're not proud of. And I often wonder, are the ones they admit to the ones that they're most proud of, and the ones that they don't admit to are the ones they're most embarrassed of and don't want to be connected to? Do you think that mindset of learning a craft and being proud of what they're doing is it actually exists, or not?
Well, it'll be their little secret. It's a lust that needs to be fulfilled. It will become an addiction to them, and they'll get to a point where they'll crave it, and they can't operate unless they've done it, and they'll fantasize over it, and they know what they've done. I mean, with Peter Sutcliffe, he tried to claim that he was, mentally broken and was unable to stand trial for that reason. But it's a defence in law. Diminished responsibility mentally, but it didn't wear. But if you get one that actually tells the truth and speaks out and says why they did it. And some of them they get sexual gratification. There's a phenomenal individual that I know, a lady who's does work for the FBI as a profiler, and she specialises in child murderers. And she was saying to me the other day, she said, for 20 years I've been listening to this filth, and these men are recounting how they've their own children and how they've tortured little girls and murdered them. And that it still turns them on, and they masturbate to it.
Yeah.
So there's no remorse or anything like that. These are people that are so damaged and broken.
Damaged and broken, even in some cases, doesn't cover it, John, because some of these people aren't damaged or broken in any way. They're born, they have a totally normal life, and for some reason, you and I are wired so that you enjoy your hobbies and I enjoy my hobbies, and for some reason, this is their hobby.
Well, again, it's where is the line? And a lot of people do get thoughts in their mind, but they never enact it, and it passes by. And the more you've come from a traumatic background, the more intense
Of
these
course,
thoughts
yeah,
are going to
absolutely.
go. But there was something really interesting that was taught many years ago, and it's basically like hurdles. When like in a running race, and you get the steeplechase, the hurdles, and when someone starts to abuse, and they take an example of a guy who goes out to Thailand, and he develops a sexual liking for young girls. Now he can't do it in the UK because he'll get caught, and he feels guilty if he does it. But he goes abroad, and for some reason, being abroad gives him the anonymity. And it's a bit like when you get the Brits abroad, that they're misbehaving. Back home, they wouldn't do it. Go
Yeah.
abroad, and they start misbehaving because it gives them an anonymity.
It's anonymity, and
Being
they must be able to justify a lot of this by, oh, if I do it in the UK, it's illegal because age of consent is 16. But if I go somewhere where it's 12 or 10, then that's okay, right? Because if I go to Amsterdam, it's okay for me to go into a
yeah.
cafe. That, I swear to God, that is a justifiable mindset for some of these individuals. That's all it takes, is a plane ticket
Well, look,
for them to sleep at night.
look, it's not saying that the thought process is morally right, but let's not put our standards on other people. This is how. If you want to understand them, you've got to listen to what they've got to say, and it might be repulsive, but it's the truth. So
I
listen to it.
100%.
And this is what I'm saying. These hurdles are their justification. So they go abroad. What does it matter? It's the same. What people do to their victims. There's a need to denigrate the victim because it dehumanizes them. And there was the one thing that came out of the research into war, soldiers in war. There was a need to give the opposition a nickname, a denigrating nickname. They called the Vietnamese and they called the Germans. So it slowly dehumanizes them, and it becomes more like what their job is one of pest control rather than of taking of a life. And it's the same when these people go out to these countries, they're in poverty and it's normal to them. And, they actually see that they're doing them a favour. And isn't it better that they get me than they get some real horrible pervert, that's going to hurt them?
Yeah.
What this guy will do, he'll go out there and he knows it's wrong. He knows it's wrong, but the lust is too strong. And the first night he might go out there and just see the scene, test the water. But his intention is not going to go away. In fact, it's building. It's getting stronger and stronger. His arousal is going up. And the next night he decides that he's going to do it. His mind's made up. He's going to pick up a young prostitute, a young kid, and he's going to have sex with them. So he does it. He actually goes through with it and he does it. And he's hit then instantly with repulsion, anger that he's done it, disgust for himself, a loathing, right? But what's happened is that hurdle, that justification, it was very high to start with. And it was actually too high for him to overcome it because he was in the UK. There was no chance of him really getting hold of one of these children without the risk being there. But going abroad, that hurdle got lower because the risk isn't there. The anonymity is now there. The hurdle gets lower and lower and lower, and he's justifying it in his head that these are people in poverty, the reasons we've just gone through.
Yeah.
And now, so low, this hurdle, that he's managed to climb over it.
Yeah.
So he's done. And what happens then? He goes out, he wants it again. But that hurdle now is so much lower. And in the end, it's so low, he doesn't even need to make an effort to go over it. It's just it becomes a normal thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is how it works in the minds of a sex tourist or anyone. Even people when they prostitute for the first time, they're disgusting, I'd never go to them. But they're turned on, they want to use one.
Yeah.
So they do. I mean, there's this argument about the legalisation of prostitution. Well, it comes with its own risks as well. I mean, we've got to run a moral society here, and the implementation of brothels is not going to take away street prostitutes. Street
No, it's not.
prostitutes won't be able to work in brothels because of their chaotic lifestyle, their addiction to Class A drugs, which makes them, vulnerable to committing acts of theft and deception. So
of course.
they're not the sort of people you want to have working around. Now, having worked for many years very closely with these women, I'm telling you now, every one of them came from childhood trauma.
Yeah.
Everyone. Most of them came from the children's home. And they were all the ones I was dealing with were Class A drug addicts, and they were all carrying life-threatening diseases, contagious tuberculosis, hepatitis C, HIV, AIDS, the lot, and things like contagious tuberculosis, airborne diseases. So wearing a condom, it really is a pointless. It will stop you getting venereal issues, but it won't stop you copping things like hepatitis C and contagious tuberculosis. And a lot of the girls were lesbians.
Yeah.
Which is another. There is a charity that deals with street prostitutes and helps them. And the findings of their survey was that 90% of the street prostitutes were lesbians. But which seems very ironic that they're in a business around a vernacular term, it cock, and yet that's not what deep down they crave. And I can remember questioning the sexuality of a prostitute once over this matter, and I said, she told me, she said, most of us are lesbians, John. I went, well, how? Why? How does it work? She said, because men hurt us. Men hurt us.
Yeah, I mean,
there was one
sense.
girl. She would do unprotected sex. And of course, the guys would love that, and she would do unprotected anal sex, and she had every disease going. And I said, but they'll take that home to their wives and all that. And her attitude was, F them, John. I care nothing for them or their family. And it comes back to the thing is when hurt people. And, in order for some people to feel normal, they have to create, an awful situation or make someone unhappy.
Yeah.
But it normalises, it makes them feel part of something then. And there was a hatred in this woman for men, an absolute hatred. But I felt sorry for many of them because these were women that were just surviving. They were just feeding a Class A drug addiction, which had come about through years and years of torment and abuse in their early years. It had never been addressed. There'd been no help. They'd had kids taken into care, violent relationships, and the Class A drug addiction needs funding. And how are they going to afford it unless they're on a very highly paid job, which these weren't?
Yeah.
Prostitution is the only answer. It's the only viable answer. And if they had a pimp, it tended to be their boyfriend. So all this stuff we see on the TV about pimps on the street, but it's a nonsense. If there's a pimp, they're usually their partner. And when you had the rent boys, the child prostitutes, the pimps tended to be older kids that were actually looking out for them. So there was a safety in having a pimp, as opposed to what is portrayed in all these nonsense films that we see. And they, and it always makes me laugh, the xenophobia of it. They've always got to be from Kosovo or Albania or somewhere like that, and it's
of course,
it makes me laugh. They can get away with that level of sort of racism, but anything else,
do you not think
they won't allow it.
By let's just say for a second, during the era of the Ripper, the prostitution was legal, and these women, even the lowest tier of that industry, would no longer be seen as a criminal, and they'd be seen as lesser. They'd be seen as maybe worth the police time, if that makes sense. Because if it's not, does that make sense? Because a lot of the time when we look at serial killers in America, it's prostitutes, and in America there's a term which is the lesser dead, and the lesser dead means these women are easy targets because no one gives a rat's ass if they go missing, and if you're dumping one body in another state, it's even harder.
Well, let's look at this. we've got comparison here.
Okay.
Now, what you see with it is that the girls on the street, they get prosecuted under something called the Street Offences Act, and it's a very old Victorian bit of legislation which really dealt with nuisance, and there's a very strong child protection element within that act as well, which stops children being brought up in brothels. And, you know, these were women that were plying their trade, and there was a common decency element. So there was a need to have some sort of decorum and decency in society. And you can see why they did it, because no one wants that brought into their backyard. And with that sort of behaviour, a lot of other criminality crops up. And, you know, you end up with a drug dealing in there, and it slowly goes downhill. So, yeah, I think there is a need to legislate this behaviour because it is antisocial. But you know, it's not the police's job to adjudicate on this or be their social worker. You know, the girls are there for a deeper reason than the police harassing them or whatever. Now, Leeds and the Yorkshire constabularies, they decided that you know, for that argument you just given, that why are we prosecuting these girls? And I agree. I think that when we would get these girls and they would be charged and they would be bailed, most of them, and they'd get a fine from the magistrates, which would be £50 fine. Which, how are they going to pay that? They're going to have to prostitute to pay it. So it did seem a little bit pointless.
Yeah, of course.
However, there was a need to sort of not have these girls in neighbourhoods around decent folk. It's wrong, you know, that, you know, the police are there to protect decent folk, the standard person.
Yeah, of course.
And, you know, we can't have people urinating in the street, sleeping, you know, and something. We can't. But it's an indicator of a problem which needs to be looked at by other sort of referral agencies. But what happened in Leeds when they had these safe zones?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I remember that.
The girls can work these areas, and then they're not going to face any harassment and prosecution from the police. Well, what happened? Assaults on the girls skyrocketed. Girls went missing, and they wanted the police back. And it was a very, very ironic situation, because when the police were back, the police knew them, they knew the police. You know, even them being prosecuted, you know, okay, it carried on. And the police were just an obstacle in their way. But there was that flow of information to and from, and there was a protection that the police patrolling that area gave them. And the violent criminals stayed away, and the police did give them a comfortable level of protection,
okay.
Which they wanted back. And they actually, when polled, wrong term really to say, but they said we would rather have it how it used to be than how it is now. And it's just one of them things. But you know, some of this old legislation is very good because it takes into account moral standards.
Thanks for watching our podcast. It's with my sponsor. It's AG1 by Athletic Greens. So Jen, as a pregnant woman, taking AG1 in the morning, how's that helped you?
Well, with the low energy I've been having due to being pregnant, AG1 has helped give me that morning boost that I've really craved.
Bear in mind, if you are pregnant, consult a doctor before taking AG1. Jen and I get AG1 delivered every month, which makes it super easy to have as a daily habit. With the single serving travel packs, I never have to miss a day. Just mixing the powder into that water, drinking it first thing every morning before breakfast. That simple.
If you're looking for an easy way to take supplements, Athletic Greens is giving you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/Sean, SHAUN. That's athleticgreens.com/Sean. Check it out.
That's the word from our sponsor. Thanks for watching. Link in the description box below this video for AG1.
I think what you've got to look at what works. There was a pilot scheme that went in Switzerland called Needle Park, and that was in Zurich during the 1980s, in which they allowed people to go into this park and just inject heroin. and it caused
But
they had to stop it in the
that's
end.
a terrible
Manual problem.
solution. That's a solution that's been put in place by somebody who has no idea to tackle the problem that they're dealing with. Shoving everybody into a park. I mean,
But
that's
and this is a problem we get. We get people that don't understand the situation, making decisions, and they don't understand the life of a street prostitute. What they
well,
need to do is go out with units, go into shopping centres and things like that. You know, the places where they get fed and the charities that help them, and speak to them and
for
understand
sure.
who you're dealing with, profile the person you're dealing with and the genre of person you're dealing with. But it's difficult putting when you get these so-called sort of like middle class do-gooders and they put their standards on others. And you know, when you're dealing with people with class A drug addictions, you know, what do you expect's going to happen? You know, you give them 5 minutes, come back in 5 minutes, and then you never see them again, and then you get disappointed. Well, they're a drug addict. What are they going to do? There was one, the Camden Ripper, in more recent time, and he was doing the same. He was, I can always remember he was active when I was working on the streets. I think his name was Harding. And a couple of girls did go missing. So I don't think we'll ever know the full extent of their victims, because a lot of these girls and that, you know, it's the same with the kids from the care homes or the kids, you know, young people living on the streets.
See,
No one really knows who they are, how many there are, and they are fodder for these very strange,
yeah.
dangerous perverts.
What I find interesting is obviously when you talk about Sutcliffe and Savile, and we spoke about the possibility of Savile being a key player for a group where perhaps he's acquiring or bringing in young individuals or vulnerable people for these twisted people to do what they do. And he knew all the secrets, and that's why he was allowed to run the muck that he was. I think it's fascinating that he's connected to Peter Sutcliffe. Can you give us a little bit more insight into how? Do you know how the two met? Do you know you said something about meeting in Broadmoor? If this is like common knowledge, and you're laughing at me here, I apologize, but there's such a big picture here, because I often refer to as the 70s and the 80s as the golden era for serial killing because of where technology was compared to now. There's no cameras, all the rest of it. You know, you couldn't just abduct a kid off a street anymore because there's so many doorbell cams, let alone government CCTV. So there seems to be a web forming with some of the most horrific monsters, you know, for that period of time that are all interconnected. Can you shed a little bit of light, just for my sake and the viewers' sake?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, Savile struck up a relationship with him. Allegedly, its inception occurred whilst Sutcliffe was in the Broadmoor Hospital. You know, the Secure Institution for the Criminally Insane. Savile did have connection with the Yorkshire Ripper in the inquiry team. You know, they did speak to Savile. There's more to it, in my opinion.
You know, there's more. You know that if we know this little nibble, that this is a crumb. This is the iceberg effect. You know what I'm saying? Because like-minded monsters mingle. You know, and I've always got this theory that we're one day going to find some dark corner of the dark web where genuine monsters and serial killers are anonymously chatting about their crimes. And I know that sounds a bit far-fetched, but I just feel like there's been so many monsters that are connected. They've got to connect some way. You know, there's got to be a reason for these two to bump into each other. There's got to be a reason for them to know what they know about each other, allegedly. And, you know, I've spoken to serial killers, school shooters from America with the Phil Chalmers channel. And I've spoken with a man named Delmas, and Delmas has killed quite possibly 40 plus prostitutes and women. And his mindset was, I've already got dead hookers in the back of my truck. Why don't I just start trafficking drugs as well? Because if they're going to catch me, they're going to do me for murder, and who cares if my truck's full of drugs? Just to sort of back up the mindset of these people, and you were talking about a moral ground and all the rest of it. Delmas has absolutely no qualms. If he was let out of jail tomorrow, he would go back to killing. You know, he's doing multiple life sentences and he'll never see the light of day. But his killings were routine. They were strangulation and dumping the bodies. It wasn't a sexual gratification thing for him. It was the killing he enjoyed. And there was no overkill factor, if you know what I'm saying. There was no, Jack the Ripper, overkill. Do you see what I'm saying? It was the same MO every time, multiple times. But some of just with the Ripper's victims, how savage were some of the attacks on his victims, John?
Yeah, well, he bashed their heads in. Hammers, rocks. He sort of really did a number of them. I mean, Ripper, so there was mutilation as well. But I mean, just to go back to what we were saying,
sure.
That Savile, unofficially, the West Yorkshire Police haven't, confirmed it. However, one of the detectives says that Savile was brought in because he was named as a suspect. But the West Yorkshire Police haven't confirmed it.
Wild.
Bizarre, isn't it? Well, you never know. I mean, there's the rumours, like we mentioned last time, that Savile was an asset for the
absolutely
intelligence services. So if that was the case, then the moment his name was put in the system, it would ping up. But what he did was he when we go back to Sutcliffe, he mutilated his victims, but he was using any tools he had handy. So there was screwdrivers were used, knives were used, hammers were used.
And what does that tell you as a police officer when you see a crime scene where a woman has had her head beaten in a hand-to-hand, there's no projectiles, it was up close and personal. What does that, I mean, surely there's a big difference between somebody who shoots somebody in the back of the head without them knowing, and then a crime scene like the Rippers. I mean, what would be the reaction?
Well, he would have gone into a frenzy with it, and it wasn't, his motive wasn't just to kill them. Again, you can tell a lot by how a body is laid out, what sort of suspect you're dealing with. So, for example, sometimes there's dignity in how they leave a body. They'll cover the body up, especially like if it's a naked body, they'll cover it up to try and give it some sort of dignity. Others will leave it open for everyone to see. And you can tell as well that if someone's done it before, or they haven't done it before, because it will have a sloppiness to it.
Do you ever see a progression?
It won't be refined in any way.
Like, for example, some people in investigations say when a criminal starts out on their spree and they're covering up the victims, and it's a representation of their guilt for what's happened, and they're covering it up from the world. And do you ever see a progression where the guilt becomes less and less with each crime scene as they develop?
Yeah, and he'll become more and more driven. So he generally thought he was doing society a favour. So he was dehumanising these girls by seeing them just like rats, really, and it was his job to get rid of them. What good do they do? They just cause misery, and I think he first started out because, like I said, one of them mocked his his libido or the size of his manhood or something like that. But also there was another argument over money. dispute over money, and the girl wanted more than he thought it was worthy of, and he just thought that was his job. He to get rid of them to start with. It was this either someone who's come from a lot of childhood trauma, so they'll be taking it. You see, this is one of the things you'll find with people that get involved in extreme violence, and that they have come from a violent upbringing. That they will attack everyone other than the person who hurt them.
Of course.
So it's how bullies are made, because a bully is someone who has been bullied. So they will find a need then to bully someone else and make them go through the torment and the ridicule that they went through and the hurt, and they enjoy it because it makes them feel normal, because that's how they feel inside, hurt and ridiculed and not loved. So they have to bring misery, and with that misery, they say misery always needs company.
Yeah.
And they feel part of something then. But then they get driven. But also, we can't rule out that some people have a bloodlust and are driven by whether it's voice in the head or they're demonically charged. When I've spoken to survivors of such ritual abuse, they tell me about when a child is sacrificed, that the whole environment is it's charged with some sort of bizarre electricity, and they all go into a frenzy of violence and sex, and smear blood over their bodies, and then start having sex with each other the moment a sacrifice is done, and it sends them into this craziness. And it's something that I've never experienced, but I suppose in a way you can look at it as a fever pitch, the same sort of group mentality you might get in a war zone, or even in a concert, to be honest. I suppose when everyone gets also charged up and it all
I think a
gets hyped up.
I think a concert is a brilliant analogy for the average person to try and understand what you're saying. It's mass synchronicity. It's mass. It's there's a word where a collective group of people all experience the same thing, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's exactly that. And a concert's a great way for you viewers to understand this horrific ritualistic killings. And I'm really glad that you sort of circled back to this horrific topic of the devil abuse, as I'll call it for algorithmic terms. Talk a little bit with me here, John, because when we look at the Yorkshire Ripper, we look at the violence, the absolute destruction of these women, and the fact that he did it so up close and personal. Where do you feel there is connections and an attachment with the Yorkshire Ripper to these devil worshipping rituals that happen? Do you believe that he was part of a group? Do you believe that he was, he believed that he was on a mission and cleansing the earth of these horrible parasites, as he thought? What evidence is there that there's a bigger picture to the devil abuse and the Yorkshire Ripper? And the reason I'm asking this is I'd like you to also comment if any of this ties in with Savile before we move on to the Moors case, which I believe you have some interesting insight to the same horrific rituals. So tell us a little bit about that, if you can, if I've got that right, John.
We go on about in the topic of ritual abuse. So, I've spoken to many victims and survivors of SRA. These are intergenerational people where their parents, mainly their grandparents crop up with amazing regularity, would take the children to rituals in which they were used, but also they were used to kill human sacrifice victims, mainly babies. So the young kids would be made to these babies that were brought in for a sacrifice, satanic ritual meeting, a black mass, and usually it's through stabbing. I think I must have spoken to probably about 10 to 15 now. They all say exactly the same thing,
Yeah.
and the
And just to
the,
reiterate for you, John, you've I just want to just make sure, because people are going to be saying, "Oh, I've heard people talk about this before. This is nonsense." John is is a former police officer who was in some very, very specialist units within the police. That's why when John talks about this, I listen, because I just don't feel like he's going to sit and make this up. I just don't feel like he's going to listen to a alleged victim and not be able to see through lies. You know, when you're trained to get information from people because you're trying to prosecute them, it works the other way when you're trying to establish a victim story and all the rest of it. So I just want to reiterate that what John is talking about is his experiences with survivors.
ones I've spoken to, they have reported it's not a crime, because these were children that were beyond the age of criminal responsibility. These were usually 6, 7-year-old kids, and 9 years of age is the age when you're accountable for your actions. So they were young, and they were used as a tool to sacrifice. And really, so the reasons for doing it, the devil does things for more than one reasons, but also if a young kid of that age does it, then there is no criminal act. There is a bigger conspiratorial act of murder, abduction, kidnap, whatever going on. But there's a need to traumatize and terrorize the victims as well prior to death, which raises the adrenaline. But also these people get immense delight out of tormenting and terrorizing.
Yeah,
And they get a bloodlust
it's
for it, and
see it as,
you know,
when a Christian, has a devout feeling for a prayer, right? And the faith they put into that, it's the exact same thing for these monsters. That is their conviction. That is how. And I'm not comparing the two. I'm just giving the people out there a way to sort of grasp where these horrific individuals' mindsets are coming from, and where it is that they're channeling this horrific energy to. It's their deity.
Well, it is their deity, and their deity wants blood, and their blood sacrifice is the diet which feeds these monsters. Ultimately, it's Satan.
Forces at play here that are very easy to sum up as satanic, and it's very easy for us to need a way of understanding and to use terminology that is common, like Satanism and Satan. But I genuinely believe that this is way older, way darker, more evil than you can comprehend, than the palatable story that is the devil and hell.
Well, whatever it is, it's a reality, and it works. And when I've also heard accounts from South Americans who practice a thing called Santeria. I've heard it from the West African community.
Yeah.
Where voodoo, and it goes on. There's one in Jamaica called Obia. And it's all the same.
Yeah.
It's all the same when you break it down. It is blood sacrifice,
Correct.
and it's a worship to these deities.
Correct.
And a different deity will have a different power, a different dominion, genre or whatever, and they do it because there's a reason. It could be for success in business. It could be to get rid of competition.
Yeah, it could be any of those reasons. And when we look at rage and pain, okay, think about when you stub your toe, right, and you get filled with anger, how quickly that anger comes on, John, right? So then when we look at how quickly your mind has changed through an action, anger and rage, if you can be aware of how much energy that's produced next time it happens, this is part of what they do. And when we talk about, you'll have heard the statement before that, there's a weird feeling in this house because, someone was murdered here, and it leaves that residue, okay? when you're torturing someone to the point where they're being gutted alive and they're experiencing every ounce of that pain, the energy that comes from pain is so great. Do you see what I'm saying? And these,
of course,
and that is why
it
they
will
do
be.
it. It's like a
It'll be
currency.
residual. Yeah, it'll be residual. I mean, how many people have bought houses and they can't stay there because they're wretched feelings? I mean,
That's what I'm saying.
Churches crop up constantly,
Of course.
and you know, some churches are built on even older places of worship.
I mean, just so you understand,
even,
my point's not so
some
much
of them
about.
they still use the old.
Yeah, my point isn't so much about the residual energy. My point is about how energy is created. And an easy way for us to understand this as a reality is we've all experienced a weird feeling in a haunted house. Imagine that negative energy being created in the moment, whether it's a killing or a sacrifice. That energy created in a moment is so vast. When it's offered in the same way as praying is offered, that is how these rituals are conducted, whether it's blood magic or whether it's a basic Wiccan white magic outward spell that's being cast. It's all energy that's being used.
Well, they'll see, and not only that, we're talking about energy that's in there, but what about these people that are active in that sort of worship, and they're active in the mutilation and the rape and the murder of children? Now, there were rumours that Jimmy Savile was a Satanist, that there was intelligence and information that Ted Heath was an active list. The range list is a phenomenal document, which is again showing people in popular culture that they were involved in these practices, and some of these go onto television. I'm not going to name him, but there was one politician who sort of always proclaimed his innocence, and I've heard him being named before as involved in the rape, the torture, and the murder of children. And I've seen this guy on the television, and you can, for me, I could see the demons dripping off of him.
Yeah.
But again, we can't prove anything. What is very bizarre is that the range list is this list which had a real credibility to it regarding its origin, and who composed this list. And this was a highly acclaimed, very professional therapist, a psychologist, psychiatrist, who had treated many survivors of sexual abuse and started dealing with ritual abuse and people with DID. And only if two or more people named, independent of each other, named the same person, so there is an extended list, then it actually went down on this list, and they've never been able to sort of refute this list and get rid of it. Dr. Joan Coleman, incredible bit of work she's done.
Wow.
But if we go back, I genuinely believe that this range list was the list that was handed to David Cameron by Philip Schofield on Good Morning TV.
Oh, very likely, yeah.
I genuinely think it was.
If it was easily to obtain on the surface of Google, I imagine that would be the extent of Philip Schofield's capabilities.
And did he give? I mean, I'm not saying for 1 minute that Schofield was innocent of anything, but it would take it to another level if that was the case.
Of course,
the range list has been handed to David Cameron and to Theresa May. Robert Greene, the phenomenal campaigner who spent two spells in the Scottish prison system for exposing ritual abuse involving Down syndrome children. Robert Greene, if you don't know him, please Google him. He's an incredible individual. He personally handed the range list to Theresa May, and I handed it also to the police and crime minister at the time. So the government are aware of the range list. They've been given the range list. Yet nothing's ever been done about it. And if we go back to prostitutes, I mean, prostitutes are used in ritual abuse, and they're used in ritual sacrifice.
Of course.
There's I spoke to a former street prostitute who went on to write a book called Dances with the Devil, Audrey Harper. She wrote a book about her time as a street prostitute, and she was taken to satanic rituals. She'd experienced the murder of children and the drinking of the blood of the victims, and also the coven used her to in an attempt to try and procure other children. And it's a valuable insight. I mean, I've read a statement by a prostitute regarding a street prostitute in London at the same period of time that I was working the streets of London. That she was, they would regularly get pregnant, these girls, and this guy said to her, "Don't get rid of it. What you got to do is you nurture the child. You know, if you don't need to work, we'll look after you drug wise." But have the baby, but we'll support you in a private clinic while you're having a baby. But here's £2,000. We will take the baby.
Yeah.
And this woman went on to supply a couple of children to this guy,
That's
and she said it wasn't just her; there was many others. So there is a regular supply of children for these things, and there's women themselves that are in the coven that will happily get pregnant. Fetuses, abortions are used, all sorts of things. So we haven't got to look at these trafficking of kids from the third world to the UK for the purpose of it. This sort of practice has been going on long before, people even travel from country to country. There's a regular supply. I spoke to another guy who went on to write a book called No Human Touch about his time as a rent boy on the streets of London as a young boy prostitute, and where kids were regularly going missing, would be picked up by punters and would never be seen again.
So, John, we've just before we carry on, we've looked at the Ripper, right? We've looked at the Ripper. We've looked at the possibility of him being connected with some sort of ritualistic abuse, lust, or, connection to something really dark. The evidence would support that if you were a frenzied killer like the Ripper and you're lost in the moment and you're doing it in such a violent, horrific way, it emulates torture, it emulates sacrifice, and it emulates the savage state that these individuals are claimed to go into during that process. And I really think that you've struck on a really good and interesting theory with Savile and the Ripper, and a darker lust that maybe the Ripper was feeding, because from a public point of view, a murderer is bad enough, but a demonic worshipping, abuse ritualistic monster is so much worse, if that makes sense.
But, I mean, how do these people know each other?
That's what I mean. How do they know each other?
I mean, years ago, there was a song came out. I can always remember, and when I was in the police, I would see people that were pretty ineffectual and useless, to be honest. Yet they'd know people, and they'd get these good jobs, which they were totally underqualified to get and inexperienced. Yet they'd get them. And I'd work when I would go into specialist units, and I was good. I knew what I was doing, and I would work with some of them were absolutely feckless idiots. And I thought, what are they doing here? And then it dawned on me a little bit later, and it was funny enough, it was someone else said to me, "How do you think they know each other?" And it was because they were Masonically connected. And so the common denominator was they were Freemasons, and that's how they got the job. That's how they knew about the job. And one job I went for, it was a really good job, and I got pulled in because I was leaving the unit I was on. Got pulled in by one of the officers that was a high-ranked officer in the intelligence side of things, and he went, "I hear you're leaving us." And I went, "Yeah, I'm moving on." He said, "Well, where are you going?" I said, "Well, I'm applying for the job. I've not got it yet." He said, "What job is it?" And they used to have a publication, an internal publication would come out, and the jobs would be advertised in the back. I said, "It's this one here." And you'd read through the job description, and it tell you what it was, and the capabilities that are required, and you know, the criteria, and it would have a number of an officer that you would have to contact for further information. And he looked at it and he went, I know him. And it turned out he was in the same lodge as this guy. He went, I know him. He said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to do you a favour. He said, you know, we all need help every now and then. And he rang him. He rang him straight away while I was there. And he went,
Wow.
you know, this job. And he went, yeah, how you doing? And so he said, look, I've got a lad here. I want to really sponsor him. He's a good boy.
Yeah.
He went, okay. He was on loudspeaker and he went, okay. He said, right, get a pen and paper. And so we get a pen and paper. And he said, right, first question is blah, 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 blah. The answer is this. The next question is, and only went for about 5 questions. He needs to know these criteria, this criteria. There's a lot of diversity stuff comes out. So you'd have competency related to the job, scenarios, and then they would have a few questions on diversity. So it ticked all the boxes.
Yeah.
And he went through, right, he needs to know this, this, and this, and this. And, you know, any problems, let us know. And so all of a sudden, I led what they call a reading list. I had all the questions and all the answers.
Yeah.
And that was my first glimpse into how Freemasonry works,
Okay.
you know. And no, I wasn't in them, but that was how it works. So, and that's how they do it. You know, now, let's take that another step further. What if, like we mentioned on our last chat, was, you know, the greatest secret societies out of the pedophile realm? Well, let's refine that even more. And we take it from paedophilia into Satanism, into this darkness, you know, this ancient worship, which is highly structured, highly disciplined. Okay, and people lose their lives on this. You know, if you've got a rat in the house, you know, you're going to die.
Yeah.
So you grass on anyone, you die, and that's that. And there's many testimonies in the Reigns list as what happened to people who spoke out, and they get killed, and that's that. So again, there might be unsolved murders that result of someone speaking out. And we're talking about highly traumatized people. We're talking about people also with DID, dissociated identity disorder, multiple personalities, you know, and mentally ill. So they'll never be legally taken seriously anyway.
Of course.
But this is the glue that binds them together, that this is how they know each other. And it wouldn't, in my experience of investigating sex crimes against children, and also, you know, in more later years, the demonic worship and what goes on there.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say I'm an authority on it, but I'm not far off it. It's quite feasible that this is how these people know each other.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think when it comes to the demonic and the dark and the underworld of that side of people, I don't think for the majority of those people it's an attraction to children that leads them into that darkness. It's just their views on innocence and what they're willing to do for their deity. We can't even contemplate the levels.
It will be multi-level again. Like I said, of course, it'll be more than one reasons. There will be people there that will be sadists.
Of course,
there will be people there that like children, that like having sex with children.
Of course,
that reality is mentioned constantly, and the mutilation and the enjoyment they get. One lad, he told me, he said you was never allowed to make a friendship. And he said, so there was at a ritual and he was caught talking to another boy. So what they did was they made him, and this was in a church, and this was in Hampshire. Hampshire seems to be mentioned all the time. So they made him, so they had the high-ranking worshipful master, chief lizard, whatever they might be. I don't know what they call them. They're all, the top ones wear white, the rest wear black hooded gowns. And they made these two boys strip naked and fight each other. And he said, I hurt this boy. And he went on the floor and they made me keep punching him. They then made him the other boy. So they made him rape him. and then they gave him a knife and made him stab the other boy to death. And I said, well, what were all the others doing at the time, grown adults? He said they were masturbating and having sex while they were doing it. So they was getting a sexual enjoyment watching two boys in a naked gladiatorial fight to the death. I mean, and these are people that no one got prosecuted for this, and this boy went on to be mutilated, and who knows what else happened. But they also eat the body parts. They take enjoyment out of biting the heart.
Yeah, of course.
I heard of one.
Ceremonial.
One boy where his heart was cut out and they beat him, and this kid went down as he still is a missing person to this day, and information has been passed on to the relevant police force and nothing is done.
So,
and they bit the heart, and the girl said, there was another one, the girl said that when they took this boy's beating heart out and bit it, and it stopped, and that's when they said it was like electricity, and they all started squealing like pigs.
well,
I've heard it all.
you know, another way of comparing this into something that people can get their head around is collective belief and faith can affect reality. And that's why I believe that, you know, when you see like bleeding statues of Jesus only seem to bleed in tiny little Amazonian villages where their whole life is their worship. And that collective faith and belief is so deep, it can manifest something like that, in my opinion. And for these monsters that do this, the collective belief and the power that they have in the secrecy of the level of horrific crimes that they're committing amplifies all of this for them. And when you talk about electricity and you talk about when a beating heart of a child stops and it's felt in the room, it's the collective unity of these horrific individuals that are amplifying that. And when we look at magic and we look at all of that side, humans and energy its easiest way of looking at it is almost like a fuel cell. And the more fuel cells in the room, the greater the ability to force that energy to where you want it to be is. It's fascinating that the Yorkshire Ripper was so violent, targeted prostitutes, the lesser dead, as we've talked about. He was violent. It wasn't just murders he was caught for. And there's this underlying demonic factor that I feel ties in with this. Now, okay, so we've really delved deep into the possibilities of the demonic side of the Ripper, his acts, looking at the devil abuse and the realities within prostitution that really created the easy targets for the Yorkshire Ripper and many killers, in fact, around the world. The next thing we're going to look at is a horrific case. And previously in my Hurtcore documentary, we looked at killers who documented what they do for watching back and all the rest of it. And the Moors murders was really a huge case because of that factor, that they recorded these horrific ordeals that these kids went through. And it was a duel, you know, it was a couple. Give us a brief summary of what you know of the case, John, and then take us through just how horrific this case really is, what these kids went through, and how this can be associated with these devil-worshipping monsters.
Well, I mean, we've got Moira Hindley and Ian Brady, who are the boyfriend and girlfriend, and this was going back to 10 years prior to our man Sutcliffe. And they killed 5 children, and 4 of them were sexually assaulted. And funny enough, I know a guy who actually brutally beat up Ian Brady in prison. He got hold of him, and a guy I know, once he was serving a sentence in the same nick, and he managed to gain access to I think in the showers or something when Brady was in there, and he brutalised him. But yeah, they killed 5 children, and 4 of them were sexually assaulted. Moira Hindley never really she went not guilty, but she did proclaim her guilt in 1987. Brady is quite an interesting character, and it is a connection. So he said, but Brady was diagnosed as being a psychopath. he's from the Baubles. He was he never knew who his father was, and his mother never mentioned who his father was, and she couldn't cope. So he was actually sold to another couple and brought up by a different family. He's from a very rough part of Glasgow. Glasgow was rough anyway. I think he had a troublesome childhood, and he went on to his first signs of it. He killed a cat when he was 10 years old and sort of gloated over the death of a cat. So again, the hurting of animals is something which is always sort of prevalent in people of this caliber. But
Of course.
he ended up in the West Riding area of Yorkshire, in a place called Hatfield, which is where our man Suckling is from. So there was a geographical connection, and then he spent a long time in Manchester, and the children were abducted and murdered in Yorkshire, and they were a boyfriend and girlfriend team, and Hindi would be used to lure the kids in, and they would then torture them, sexually abuse them, and then murder them. And the strange thing is the people that came to the assistance of Moira Hindley. You've got Lord Longford who always campaigned for her release, despite the fact that she admitted her guilt in the end in 1987. And you think, well, who would do that? Why would someone want for this person to be released? It's bizarre. I think that there is a very satanic element to what they're doing, and especially when multiple children go missing, where do they end up, and what are they put through? So once they're taken, and then their bodies are found. I mean, what went on in that time? Could these children have been taken and used in a ritual? Were these two procurers for children for a bigger picture? We don't know. We don't know. Kids are a commodity, and there's people that will pay a lot of money for children to be brought to them. Now, I get this from this woman, Audrey Harper, and she says that in her book that the coven were always wanting children to be brought to parties. So as well as the ritual side of it, the coven would also like to have orgies in which children were a main ingredient for them. So this is where the normalisation of pedophilia comes into it. So there's always a need for these children one way or another. That was the other thing, they recorded it, didn't they? And that's killed kids. They were chopping their fingers off.
He's dealing with serial killers. The tape recording of Leslie Ann Downey shocked everyone who heard it.
We know what happened to Leslie Ann because, there was that gruesome tape that was found. She was screaming for her life, and it was the last moments of her life, and that never went away from any of us. It's an interesting thing that none of us ever. We never came to terms with that. Even as journalists, you say a lot of terrible things, but I could cry now when I think of it because I know.
For me, why? Documenting something like that is either for self-gratification and reliving it, or it's to show that you've done something, but not just killed someone. So, for example, if your mission is to abduct a child and prolong death and torture them, you could kill them quickly and then mutilate them and be like, oh, look what I've done. Whereas putting the recorder on and having this horrific ordeal go on would be the video recording of the time, of the era, for evidence, for showing a potential higher overlord of this coven-style, devil crew, the evidence of what they've done and the horrific extent that the kids have went through. I mean, could that be the case, John?
Well, yeah, it may well be. I mean, then you've got to look at these people and their backgrounds. They come from traumatized backgrounds, and it's the same thing. You can quite easily start profiling these people. When we look at Fred and Rose West as well, you know, there was 900 videotapes were seized, and bear in mind, Fred West used to make his own porno films, and he ran like this club, this dirty video club, you know, where a load of perverts would meet up. This was before the internet, years before, you know, and the West were abducting children and murdering them, and they even killed their own children. And Rose West was very promiscuous and was always having sex with other men while he would watch, and all sorts of things. But they had this perverted video club, and there were rumours that there were police officers were involved in this club, and 900 videos were seized, and not one of them was ever viewed, and they were all destroyed. And it was only because one detective, she started drawing a parallel between missing children and this family. She wanted to get a warrant to search, you know, that house in Gloucester. I can't remember the name of the street now. It'll come to me in a minute. And they kept blocking it. They wouldn't authorise it. And in the end, she just went and got a warrant, and I think she might have falsified her signature or something and managed to get the warrant. Of course, they started finding bodies. But again, there's a huge cover-up around the West. Massive cover-up. And bizarrely enough, Fred West lived in Coatbridge in Scotland, just outside of Glasgow, and children went missing in Coatbridge, and there was a case of a girl called Moira Anderson that went missing in Coatbridge, and it was her father. Eventually, I think he admitted on his deathbed of killing her, but he was involved in a bigger group of perverts and like-minded people.
Here is a word from today's sponsor, Aura. If you Google someone, you can find out all kinds of personal information about them. This information is accessible because of data brokers who profit by selling your information to robocallers, telemarketers, spammers. You can use my link, https://aura.com. Aura is AURA / Sean Atwood, SHAUNATT Wood, to try 2 weeks for free and see how many data brokers are sharing your info. Also linked in my description box on this YouTube version, or scan the QR code on the screen.
Aura also monitors your emails and passwords to see if they were involved in a data breach and exposed on the dark web, and gives you the recommendations on what to do.
Aura has almost every internet safety tool you'll ever need, all inside one app.
And at the same time, Fred West was up there. So these people all know each other. They're all so connected. And when you start getting serial killers as children, you've got to start looking at a very much bigger, organised thing going on.
Yeah.
This isn't just one chaotic simpleton.
Yeah.
You know, no way. This is far accomplished and too connected for the likes of an idiot like Fred West. There was more to it. Especially when you get serial killing of children, I think you should start looking at ritual abuse stuff going on.
So, obviously, we were looking at a case. The Moors murders isn't, you know, it's the 60s. You know, the knowledge of ritualistic abuse and the way that information travels is so different now. The transcripts of one of the victims, Leslie Ann, the young 10-year-old girl who was killed, there's a section of the transcript of her death, the tapes that the pair made, and it's so upsetting reading this 10-year-old girl's reaction to what these monsters are doing to her, and her begging for her life, and it really sort of sets into stone how dark and horrific this pair was. And there was always arguments that one was worse than the other and one was egging on, and almost that maybe this wouldn't have happened if these two weren't brought together. What's your opinion on if these two had ever never met? Do you think that the murders would have been so prolific?
Yeah. It's like most things on your own. You're limited to what you can do. But when you get two together, it's not. You don't do double the work. You do 3 times the work.
Yeah.
And it's the same as the West. What the chances of two like-minded sickos getting together? But it does happen.
Yeah.
And people are sort of drawn to each other. There's something that vibes with them. And when they've both got this bloodlust and this perversion, but again, when you get, like the satanic covens, where it's full of like-minded people, so you're not going to go far to find someone who isn't of the same ilk. And it very, very odd. But they had a choice, and they chose to do it. They chose to do it, and they enjoyed doing it. And it's like we said before. When that child is in extreme pain, they feel good, they feel happy.
Yeah.
And you get that with a lot of people that what they cause chaos and misery wherever they go because they want to, and it makes them feel normal. And these people have taken it to a higher, more refined level. And they enjoyed it.
It's fascinating because we've looked at the Ripper, we've looked at the Moors, we're still talking about the Moors murders, but when we talk about people that do horrific things, when you spoke earlier about the prostitute that had every disease and she was sleeping with people and they were going back to their wives and she just didn't care, to me that's the same mindset as what's going on here. It's just a longer,
of course, and similar background, one of abuse, rejection, neglect, torment, hatred. The ingredients are the same, the diet's the same.
Yeah.
And what does she leave behind? And it's the same, but when people torment others, you get that with domestic violence. They might not be physically violent, but they could be like they torment their partner so much that the person gets sick and dies of cancer.
Yeah.
As a result of decades of unhappiness. You can do that, deliberately putting people down all the time and saying cruel words to them, knowing that it hurts them.
After the Leslie Downey murder, I didn't think in terms of redemption, but if I did, I would have said I knew I was beyond redemption, that I would never, ever be anything other than what I've become, totally corrupt, evil, wicked. The worst parts of it were seeing Mrs. West in the witness box, and I was looking at her as she was giving evidence, and she saw me looking at her, and she screamed across at me, "How can you look at me?" And she called me every name under the sun. And then Mrs. Kilbride was giving evidence. Finding it very, very difficult to do this Leslie and Downey thing. I think I'll have to be as brief as possible. There was that tape, which isn't what people think it is, but it's bad enough, and I just hurt so much to think that I could have been such a cruel bastard. It suddenly hit me. Just what I'd done. And I think he sensed this. We were sitting next to each other. And he just put his hand on my arm and squeezed my arm. And I turned around and looked at him, and he was telling me with his eyes to keep quiet. He started questioning me, and I always remembered him telling me that if ever anything like this happened, to not answer any questions at all, to say nothing. I evaded everything. My solicitor told me they'd found the body of a child, identified as Leslie Ann Downey. Did I know anything about it? And I said no. a week, I think a week after that, I'm not sure, they found John Kilbride's body. And they charged me with the murder of, I think it was the murder of John Kilbride. Yes, it was. They set me down behind a table, and on the table was a large poster of John Kilbride, and they had this album photographs, and they said to me, will you just identify these pictures or photos, or tell us if you've seen them before. And I looked, and it was a moorland scene. I couldn't say I hadn't, because I was standing on a rock, and I said yes. And then they turned over the page, and it was horrendous. It was a picture, a photograph of just after they'd unearthed the body of John Kilbride. And I turned my head away, and I said, I'm not looking at those. Please close that door. I couldn't live with a burden of guilt anymore. It wasn't just a sudden decision thinking, oh, I better do this and I'll get parole in 1990. On the contrary, I told the police I wasn't applying for parole. It's widely believed that Brady, I confessed because I knew Brady was on a fair job, whereas on the contrary, I confessed and he wouldn't until the July, until after they'd found Pauline Reed, and until he'd seen me on Saddleworth and knew that I was not messing about and I was going to where the areas of the graves were, and that's when the police began to get rambling garbage off him. It was the night of October the 6th, and I just had this awful feeling of dread. We drove into Manchester Central Station, and he told me it wouldn't be long, unfortunately, or unfortunately. He then appeared with this news. It turned out he was 17, and he introduced him as Eddie, and I said virtually nothing going back. Ian had taken, had done his into the front room, and I opened a bottle of wine, and he said to me quietly, go and get Dave. The living room door was open, and all I could see was blood everywhere. And I stayed in the kitchen, and I was sick. I just cannot stand the sight of blood. Never have been able to. I thought David Smith had killed him at first, but Ian said he'd hit him and put Evans with the hatchet to shut him up. And the next morning, there was a knock on the back door. And I opened the door, and to cut a long story short, it was a policeman dressed in a baker's uniform, his jacket and hat. It had sunblast on the pocket, and the first thing I said was, you've got the wrong house, we have mothers of pride. I was sitting in the small dining area, and I heard a couple of the women talking about body being found on the moor, and I thought, oh God. And I taken to the High Police Station, where my solicitor was waiting for me, and he told me they'd found the body of a child, identified as Leslie Ann Downey.
Lieutenant Myra, can you confirm, in a short note, that you got my letter of intent, which I posted from here on last Monday, the 21st. Because I'm working on another thing now. I've overwritten the thing I sent you last week. I can vaguely remember where I left off. So I just hope that I've got it right, but it won't be much out. Okay, thanks. Bye.
person.
What always makes killers stand out for me are the ones who withhold the information of where bodies are buried. Now, for me, that is the reason they do that is because that's them holding on to their last thread of connection
Yeah,
to what they've done. And
yeah,
the little boy, Keith Bennett. Keith Bennett's the only one whose body's not been found, and
yeah,
you know those two animals know. They knew where that little boy was, and
yeah, yeah.
it for me, it almost solidifies the mindset where you have killers that confess and give up the bodies, and then you have the ones that it amplifies and it almost what I believe carries them through their sentence is holding on to the knowledge of where that dead body is, and it comforts them. It gives them a sense that they're not alone because they have that knowledge. And what's your view on that? Do you think that that is what
Well, yeah, they'll hold a little bit of power, and there'll be that need to torment.
yeah,
And this shows what cruel people they are. You know, we weren't there. We don't know what went on.
of course.
But had we been there, you know, maybe we'd have seen a cruelness that we didn't expect from people. I interviewed one woman who ended up being convicted of the murder of her own son, and she was a manipulator, and she'd come across all sort of nice and respectable, but you know, I outwitted her. And at that moment when she realised that I'd done her, she turned on me in a heartbeat and she spat in my face and called me a see you next Tuesday. But because what I'd done was I'd antagonised and she'd ended up unwittingly unleashing the monster that was inside her. And I saw for the very first time a brief glimpse into what her son would have experienced. You know, that demonic, spiteful, vile, anything goes beast that she won't show the outside world, but in private she'll show it.
Yeah.
You know, that other side to these people and getting that slight glimpse into their world. You know, there are some people that are dangerous, and they are evil. They are evil. There was one guy, and he got convicted of 2 murders, and one of the things was he put in his he killed his victims through internal injuries, young girls, and he would put his whole fist and arm into their body, ripping into their
Jesus.
organs, and that was, you know, how he got his pleasure. And normal standard guy with a job and everything else, but inside there was this monster. This animal.
Yeah, and do you know?
And then and it's the same with when we mentioned before with this guy Wayne Cousins. I'm so happy that they're now going to do an inquiry into the officer who failed to investigate the allegations of him flashing, because anyone who knows anything about sex offenders knows that flashers are very, very dangerous individuals. And if the opportunity is given, they will go from a very minor sexual offence to murder. It's not a progressive thing. It's an insight into what is really going on inside them. And the flashing is part of it. Is that confidence that I can do what I want, and given the opportunity, they will do what they want, and it will be horrific. You know, on a crime level, well, it's very minor, but it's giving you an insight into the capabilities of this person. This person will kill in a heartbeat if the opportunity arises. And it's a glimpse, and it's understanding the mindset of these people. So, and this is where you do get experts and profilers that know this. And if the right information and training is given to investigative authorities, then they can do a better job than just to ignore it and trivialise it.
So during the 60s, when all of this took place, was there any cases off the top of your head that, you know, reinforce how prevalent the ritualistic abuse was back then, to tie in the theory that the Moors murderers could possibly have been involved in getting children for ritualistic abuse, or were tied in some way. Is how far back in the modern world is the prevalence of this ritualistic abuse, in your opinion, or in cases that you know of?
Yeah, documented wise, there's not a great deal. It started really coming to the surface in the 80s with what they term as
Sure.
satanic panic.
Okay.
And cases actually started coming out, and there was a very brave politician called Jeffrey Dickens, and he actually really started making waves and went on to Panorama and did many interviews stating that we should be looking at child murders a little bit more differently, that there could be a satanic element to it. And he ended up on the James Wales show and on Channel 4 and Panorama and everything. And unfortunately, he had an untimely heart attack and died. But he was the first real campaigner to out this thing. But we saw it, in films in the 60s. You look at films like Rosemary's Baby, the Hammer House of Horror films. Christopher Lee goes on about it when he's interviewed. He's a very interesting guy, Christopher Lee, because he always plays like Lawrence Van Helsing, and Vincent Price would play Dracula or vice versa, in a lot of these horror Hammer films. And he's interviewed and he goes on to say, this is real. Do not mess with the occult.
Yeah.
And he was actually worked for the intelligence services and was a member of the SAS, Vincent Price.
He was.
Christopher Lee.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he was cousin to the guy who wrote the James Bond books, Fleming.
Yeah.
So they had links with the intelligence services, and he was like an authority on the occult. Because back then it was there. It was allegorically given to us. And then it was only when it started really coming out. Even the Cook report, Roger Cook, did an amazing investigative documentary about Satanism in the UK, and he went and confronted one woman who was an active Satanist, and he even interviews the woman I mentioned, Audrey Harper, in his documentary. And then they termed it the Satanic Panic, and they said that people were just witch hunting and it was a load of nonsense, and we never really heard much about it. But when we look at the parallels between this, is that these were prolific murderers. Why they were doing it, unless they tell us, but we'll never truly know. But the one thing that, in my opinion, and if we can link this to what went on with the Fred and Rose West as well, was that they were. I generally think they were part of a bigger picture. I think these people were connected, were linked, were procurers of children, and they were part of a bigger scene, as it were, not just self-gratifying paedophiles. I think these are a part of organised paedophilic satanic networks, without a doubt. Fred West, and I think the authorities need to look at his connection to this town of Coatbridge and the children that went missing now. Again, when we look at our man Peter Sutcliffe, there's allegations that he may have murdered 2 Swedish tourists as well. We've got to look at missing people.
Yeah.
And we also should be looking at absconders from care homes in the area as well. And I think you'll find that their victims are greater, and their connections, and who comes to their assistance, and who aids and abets these people as well. And that should pretty much give you an insight into who these are. Why would anyone want to assist the early release of Moira Hindley? And there've been a few. Like I said, Lord Longford, I think, and I might be wrong, I think even the actor Jim Broadbent was campaigning at one point for her release. So I wouldn't swear on that. And I know
Yeah.
he did play in the dramatisation of her life, but I think he was a pro Hindley supporter.
Yeah.
Again, I wouldn't swear on that. I'd have to do my research in them. But I find that appalling. Why would anyone want to do that? And I think the fact that they do speaks volumes about their hidden personality.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, John, but my opinion is that they are all connected. They are all linked.
I happen to agree with you, and I think it's fascinating. Again, we've delved into these cases. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. Leave your comments down below. This is a continuing conversation. And next week, we're going to be looking at some of your comments, answering your questions, and we'll be diving into some more crime theory. So, John, thank you for joining us. Make sure you subscribe to my channel, John's channel, and the Sean Atwood channel with the bells on. Leave a like, share this video, and thank you for joining us. From me, Ron Swanson, as always. Be safe out there, guys.
Kilowatt was an aging con of 65 who stood a chance to stay alive and leave the joint and walk the streets again. As the time he was to leave drew near, he suffered all the joy and fear of leaving 35 years in the pen. Then on the day of his release, he was approached by the police, took him to the warden, walking slowly by his side. The warden said, "You won't remain here, but it seems the state retainer claims another 10 years of your life. But we'll raise the prisons to the ground. Help us raise the prisons to the ground."